Hello, everyone. My name is Rishika Porandla. I am the founder and director of Spacetime Archives, which is an educational outreach nonprofit aiming to provide unique STEM learning opportunities and resources to underserved youth, especially in our niche of astronomy and aerospace education. Spacetime Archives is currently running an interview series highlighting the stories of extraordinary women who are at the forefront of educational progress and equality. On that note, let me introduce one of those women, Courtney Black. Courtney is an education project manager with the International Space Station National Laboratory. She has spent over 14 years teaching, and her teaching philosophy is rooted in three principles, which she speaks about, which are build positive relationships, foster an environment of trust, and create engaging learning experiences. Courtney has worked with various organizations, including NASA, to bring space education to classrooms and is eager to foster more progress. So, Courtney, I'm so excited to have you on this interview today. Do you have anything you want to say, any current initiatives that you want to shed light on briefly?
And now I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. The more we can shine a light on space education and making advancements and making space more accessible to everyone on the planet, the further we can go as a civilization. I love the old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that that is something that has been an overarching theme of these past few years. And as we see the space industry grow exponentially, there's some exciting opportunities, not just for those that have historically pursued STEM or space careers, but the new frontier of space careers where we see a whole different population who see themselves in space.
I just wanted to say your evolution from teaching to project management is incredibly inspiring. Most of the questions that were submitted nationwide from Spacetime Archive students, but our first one is a more personal one curated to my experience. So I actually met you at the Kennedy Space Center Career and Networking event back in April. These events are usually a great place for high schoolers and college students to gain connections and internships opportunities. But what was your rationale or motivation for attending and representing your company?
That's a great question. A lot of times we get asked for, what's your return on investment? What do you hope to get out of this? And an outreach event like the career and networking event, is basically just to bring and rise awareness of these space careers to a slew of students that are getting ready to enter the workforce. And it's really exciting for me to kind of be that connection and say, I know that you may not have thought about it. And as we change and evolve in the space industry, there are new careers that we're talking now about space hospitality. You might be a hospitality major, but maybe you're going to have the first hotel in space, which I know that one of the space stations is trying to aim to be that. And we're very excited. It's space tourism. How do we profitize space, but also make it more accessible and more affordable as we move forward? So participating in those different events like the career networking event is just really helping students see that connection and see themselves in an industry that has been predominantly very similar looking, very similar. They've all been astronauts and engineers, and we're and typically male. So now that we're starting to see this almost renaissance of the space industry, it's cool to kind of to be that conduit to say, hi, I see you and I see you and your future in the space industry.
As a quick follow-up question, the first time you did one of these networking events or one of these outreach programs, did you immediately volunteer being like, I love people, let me do this? Or was it something that you were like, you gradually started to like?
Well, I'll talk to anybody who doesn't run away first, and especially about something I'm passionate about. But no, I didn't initially volunteer for them because I thought, well, is this, really, does this align with our strategic priorities? And then you have to realize that the space industry is all about the people we serve. So anytime I have the opportunity to work with people, and I told half jokingly most of the attendees that day, when you're running your own space business, remember my name. So when I come apply for a job at your organization, just remember me, because I'm only half joking. I've seen a lot of young people rise very rapidly through the space industry and do some really phenomenal things and meet a need that most other organizations didn't even know existed. So to be a part of that and to be a tiny little part of their story is super exciting. So I will look forward to signing up for all of those events.
I'm sure students were very appreciative that you were there and helping out and just really connecting with students. That was something I noticed from our interaction. You genuinely cared about what I was doing in the past. You asked me about what my prior internships were, what I wanted to pursue in the future. And I think that's something great that you're lending to the community.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
The first question that was actually asked in from registration was, how do you believe that your background in teaching for over a decade has influenced your approach to managing educational projects with the ISS National Lab?
That's another great question. As a former formal classroom educator, I got firsthand experience to see what inspires young people. And continually, you would see the things like dinosaurs and space. But that active engagement really kind of it gets driven home when you can kind of make those connections one more time, build those relationships, um, and help students connect from their being to the space industry, to the curriculum itself. So being an educator is so much more about just drawing the map for students. It's asking those questions, what interests you? I had a student who I'll never forget, and he really wasn't interested in school at all, but he loved birds of prey. So I started trying to figure out how I could take any lesson and incorporate physics principles with how birds of prey fly. And then tertiary or uh, birds of prey, what kind of consumers are they? Are they tertiary consumers? How do they fit into this beautiful food web? And really start to build the curriculum about around those interests. So I think that if we can kind of take that principle into the workplace and leverage someone's skill sets, leverage their desires and their passions, to work together towards building this community and space, then that really just will make us so much stronger and so much bolder as we move forward.
So you just mentioned a strategy of an educational strategy to connect to a specific student. Do you find that you vary your strategies based on like what type of school you're in, what the age group of the student is, or do you have various methods of teaching that work for you?
That's a great question. At the end of the day, good teaching is good teaching, but if you don't identify these students and their needs, then you're not going to be able to. It's kind of like, a hungry belly won't allow a hungry mind to learn. So you have to address some needs before you can kind of delve into the curriculum. And I do try to tailor or cater. I've taught everything from second grade to high school. And of course, you're going to be a different teacher. You're going to be the educator that they need. And I always try to do that, is to be, and that even translates to my job now. you know I do project management, but what is the need within my organization? What are we not currently doing well, or what can we do better? So I try to focus on those things, and being adaptable. And I think by modeling that, not only for my students, but for my coworkers, like, I can adapt. You need me to do this week? Okay, great. I think adaptability is super important in the classroom, in the workplace, as well as in space.
So you're obviously a very motivated and passionate individual. I want to know like how your evolution progressed over time. As a kid in like the educational school system, did you or have a motivation to pursue this route, and how did you go from teaching to project management?
That's a great question. I wasn't a very good student, and it wasn't because I wasn't bright. It, I just enjoyed learning more than and sometimes it wasn't the teacher up there that, giving a lesson. I can remember very few lessons that actually took place in the classroom. So much of my education, I felt like, came from reading books and watching documentaries, and exploring knowledge on my own, learning about the things that I was passionate about, the things that really mattered to me. I think had more educators when I was in school uh, tied in some of those interests, like how does this child learn, instead of that one size fits all that when I was growing up, this is how we learned times tables. This is how we learn spelling words. I'm not a particularly good speller. They did whole word learning. If I would have learned phonics, I think I would have been a better speller. Now I still second guess myself when I'm creating a document. But having that experience as a student led me to be the type of teacher that I think I would have needed when I was younger. So I tried, and I had some great teachers. Don't hear me wrong. And I had some wonderful ones. Diane Carrero was my fourth and fifth grade teacher. I loved her. She got me. She definitely tailored that education so that it would be particularly engaging to me. But it really formed the type of teacher that I was. Fast forward to uh, probably February of 2020, I did one of the very last downlinks with the ISS with a group of students. Never thinking that I would leave the classroom. I was pretty dead set that I was just a teacher through and through. But at that point, we went to remote learning with COVID, and I really started to struggle. And then we went back to hybrid teaching in the fall, and I continued to struggle because the increasing demands that they put on educators were getting without the commensurate pay increase, without their respect or listening to educators about what they really needed. And that began to wear on me. And I thought, if I didn't teach, what else would I do? And if I could support educators, that was something that I was interested in. That, okay, I think my time as an educator is winding down. I think it's coming to an end. But what I can do is support other educators and identify programs and work on programs that benefit education, educators, and students. So that's kind of how I transitioned into this job.
Were you always involved in the space industry, even as a teacher, or was it something that you got into recently?
Well, I was always interested in it. I can remember wanting to be an aeronautical engineer when I was younger. And you are way too young to remember the Challenger explosion, but they wheeled in the televisions to my first grade classroom. And I was in Tampa, Florida at the time, so we could see it outside if the day was clear, but we didn't go outside. We were watching it on the TV, and we watched the Challenger explode. And I always thought about that and like, I want to build them a better spacecraft. I want to do that. So fast forward to my freshman year in high school, I took geometry, which is a little bit important if you're going to be an aeronautical engineer. And I was awful. I think I passed with a D plus, and the teacher was great, but her teaching style was not one that I learned well from. And she kind of looked at me and said, maybe you need to think about another career. And I wish she'd never said that. That was really kind of a turning point, but I'm glad she did because it did lead me to teaching eventually. So I've always been interested in space. And when I had been teaching for 7 or 8 years, I was teaching eighth grade science and loved the space unit. I was like, oh, yes, it's time to teach about space. So when I was kind of stuck because I'm like, oh, I know I can do so much more with this unit because it's super cool. And I took to a professional learning community, which was online. And I asked, I'm like, anybody have any ideas? And a teacher who's now a very good friend, I had never met her before, said, why don't you think about applying to be a teacher liaison with the Space Foundation? I'm like, oh, cool, great. What is that? She's like, just apply. Sounds like it's right up your alley. Well, what it is, it's a exclusive group of teachers that are invited to Space Symposium each year. They share, they network and they share lessons, and then they also get to meet a lot of the industry. So that was kind of the hook. And once I started in on that program, I became involved with Space Center Houston Seat Crew, Jet Propulsion's laboratory, solar system ambassadors, and then our educational program, Space Station Ambassadors, which is the educational wing of the ISS National Lab. And I became really involved. So when this job popped up, I had already been very well acquainted with a lot of the resources out there for educators, specifically those that identify as space educators.
That's great. It's your passion just is showing through this interview, and I'm so glad that even though you weren't able to pursue the route of aeronautical engineering, maybe you're teaching someone who will eventually go down that route.
I hope so. I think that would be just the absolute coolest full circle moment. And I have a list of names of kids that I know could and may do it someday who really did their passion. I don't ever want like to impart my passions on a student, but I would definitely want to help them find their own. But a few of them caught the space bug and we kind of would nerd out together. And I think a few of them have real potential to go and be one of those students that run a company or design a spacecraft. And if they do, I would love to see it launch. I hope they remember me.
No, the space bug is a serious thing. If you look at my wall behind me,
It's
it's
pretty impressive. I love
yeah,
it.
it is. Going on to the next question that was submitted through registration. In your experience, how can educators ensure that underserved or marginalized students have equal access to learning opportunities, especially in fields like space education, like you said yourself, are traditionally seen as more exclusive?
Uh, that's a great question. I think that there are a lot of barriers that still need to be broken down. I've been to different conferences and events, and people think that we've come a long way, and we have. But I look at the student bodies that I used to teach. I taught it primarily Title I schools, and that was intentional because I knew that I love untapped potential. That's one of my favorite things. It's fun to teach kids that are high flyers and have been told they're the smartest thing ever since they were tiny. Those kids are fun because you can really help them soar. But it's the kids that maybe didn't see themselves. Um, in a career where they would be designing and launching spacecraft, or they would be utilizing these complex STEM concepts in order to achieve a certain goal. So, in order to make sure that underrepresented and underserved communities, it's first and foremost awareness. A lot of kids don't know about free programs like Zero Robotics or Orion's Quest. And the more that I can promote those activities to educators that serve underrepresented and underserved communities, I think that's just the first step, that awareness. Secondly, is funding. A lot of organizations and commercial space providers will talk about STEM education, but when it comes time to funding some of these initiatives, support is scarce. There are some that do a good job. Boeing supports a project called Genes in Space, which is a free competition where students can apply to send their DNA experiments to the space station. And it's a great program, but we need to do more. We constantly need to be soliciting support. We're on the right path. I see these organizations doing the right things, but the more and more that we can support, especially educators that serve these underrepresented, underserved. So anytime we have a new program or a new project that comes about through, that's our first vetting criteria. Does it serve, an underrepresented or underserved community? And if the answer is no, then we pass on it because there are plenty of opportunities for students that have traditionally always had those opportunities. We don't need more of those. What we do need is more uh, programs that serve these students that have that untapped potential.
That's an incredible philosophy, and I enjoy seeing how it carried through from when you were teaching, you carried that same philosophy, so I'm glad to see that it never died down. So I wanted to ask, with your current work with the ISS National Lab, what are your current initiatives? What's there for you in the future with the company?
That's a great question. We're constantly reassessing and reevaluating. I know that we're getting ready to start a new fiscal year. So we'll pull out the strategic priorities from last year and we'll say, does this still work? Is this what we're still aiming to do? Or do we need to update this? A big initiative is workforce development. And defining workforce development has been something that's really, really interesting because a lot of people think workforce development happens after someone's already in the workforce, but we're starting to look at it like, well, maybe we can extend down into college or even high school. Maybe we can look at CTEs, career and technical certifications. We can start saying, well, a high schooler can learn how to weld. high schooler can do this. A high schooler can get some of the skills and industry certifications that we need now in the space industry so that they come out of high school or even college or technical college already equipped to fill some of these roles. And those are kind of those main priorities right now. Like, how can we better equip? How can we better empower? And how can we enable these students in order to pursue these careers from day one?
Do you have a particular project or initiative that you feel like proud of that you've seen progress and that you think has had a large impact?
I love the Space Station Ambassadors program. I have two programs that I primarily operate. There are others as well, but these are my two pet projects. And one is Space Station Ambassadors. It's a network of about 2,500 educators and space enthusiasts from across the globe. We do networking events, we do special events at conferences. We take ambassadors to different conferences so that they can learn more, not only about the national lab, but they can attend sessions, they can network, they can meet other educators, they can meet influencers in that space education community. And then we have webinars that where if on a Wednesday evening, if you'll join in at 7 o'clock, you'll learn more about this program. And then we try to take whatever materials they might need and get those into the hands of educators. Whether we make it like what I love to call kitchen pantry science, where you can find everything you need in your kitchen pantry, or if there's a STEM kit that we can ship to educators, we try to do that. So I love Space Station Ambassadors, and I love Expedition Space Lab. What we kept hearing was that teachers were overburdened, overworked. It was too much effort to try to do the extras that a lot of these high flying teachers will do. And a lot of the high flying teachers are veterans. They have a lot of experience, and they've been doing it for 20 years. So, but a lot of these teachers are quitting between the years of 1 and 5. So we wanted to create a program specifically for them where there were a lot of plug and play lessons, things that were ready to go, that they didn't have to think, that were standards aligned, incorporated space education, but also really were highly engaging with students. So we would do activities that dealt with sound and how does sound travel in space? Does sound travel in space? How do satellites work? And we did a whole activity called talking around corners, how, the line of sight also means that there's a signal where that can bounce off a satellite. So we've done a lot of the legwork for educators in Expedition Space Lab, where we have standards aligned lessons, they have articles, they have a career connection, they have a video, so that it's really like a one-stop shopping kind of a salad bar of lessons, and say, well, I want to do this life science lesson that relates to space and this physics lesson that relates to space. And educators can kind of pick and choose. So that was another project that I worked on that I really, really enjoyed.
It's nice to see how much love you have for your work, even through decades, because a few people that I've interviewed, they actually mentioned that like they've been in the same job for years and it's become like the corporate landscape has become repetitive or like almost boring. But I can see like as you're talking about your initiatives, you're always so excited. Is it heartwarming to see people's reactions when they finally understand something or their reaction to when an opportunity is presented to them that they didn't have before?
Eh, You I like to pay my bills. I'll put it that way. But the reward of seeing an educator this past spring at the Space Symposium, we were able to bring Steve Spangler, who is a TV host, and he was on the Ellen Show 27 times, and he's a science educator. But he is so inspirational. And we were able to bring him to Colorado Springs during Space Symposium, and he talked to a room full of about 100 teachers. And we laughed and we cried, and to see the impact that it had on these educators, and the words, the emails that they sent that were like, you have no idea how much this means to me. It's going to keep me in the classroom even longer. I was so inspired. This was so beneficial. I got to learn about some cool activities that I can do with my students, but I also got to just really understand and get reminded of why I do what I do. And when you see that in an educator, it is kind of like the moment when you are in the classroom and you have a student that understands a concept for the first time, and you got to be a part of that magic, that elusive aha moment. Then this is kind of the educator's version of how, when I help educators and build programs for them, and I see them using them and I see them helping them become better teachers than they were before, although they were already amazing. That is, that intrinsic reward is something that I don't think I could be an accountant. I'll put it that way. I don't think I would get the same kind of intrinsic reward from that.
I wanted to ask specifically about an initiative that you ran for a district called the ARISS. I'm not sure if,
Eris, yes.
yeah, ARIS. Could you share some details about the process of actually executing that program and the impact it had on the community?
Yeah, no, that was one of my favorites too. I have a lot of favorites, and I'm okay with that. Back in 2017, I was just new to the space educator community, but I had met a lot of different educators that had done an ARIS contact. So I would go bebop up, at conferences and be like, I want to do an ARIS contact. And people would be like, great, what's your equipment like? And I'm like, I don't have any equipment. And so they'd be like, okay, well, when you find an amateur radio club to partner with, call us back. Well, the amateur radio club in Fort Myers Amateur Radio Club, actually called the school district of Lee County. And they're like, listen, we have an amateur radio club that would love to do an ARIS contact. Are there any educators that would be willing to write the proposal? And I'd already spoken to my district several times. They were very impressed with my tenacity. Like, we got to do this. And they're like, oh, we have just the teacher for you. So someone down at the district actually put us in contact with CenturyLink and the Fort Myers Amateur Radio Club. We worked together on a proposal, and we did a year in space, and we did different space activities leading up to our 10-minute ARIS contact, which is ham radio. The equipment we used was a little more sophisticated than the walkie talkie, but essentially that's what it was. And we actually got to um, talk to Dr. Anna Chancellor, Serena Anna Chancellor, and her main radio had broken that day. So she was talking to us on the backup radio. But it was a fantastic opportunity. At 21 students, every one of them were able to ask a question in 10 minutes. It was so quick, but it was so cool. One of them, Emily Gunger, who I believe she's a senior at Embry-Riddle this year, she was like, I want to be the first boots on Mars. I know it, and this has just solidified it. So being a part of that, it was a lot of work, but it was fantastic. And to be able to see the impact it had on those students. And I still keep in touch with most of the 21 students. And that was back in 2018. So goodness, that was a few years ago, about 5 years ago, but that was one of the best experiences for myself and my students.
I'm glad to see that you're still keeping in touch with those 21 students because it's seeming like a learning opportunity with you is one for life because you'll still check up on those students and keep track of where they're going. So that's very nice.
Well, yeah, sometimes they appreciate it. Sometimes I'm sure they don't, but I love finding out about what they're doing and what they're pursuing, and they're really, that impact and that reach and having that community involvement, like that was super cool too. So I made some connections through that ARIS contact that I still keep in touch with those community members. But it's kind of like when you teach or when you host one of these events and you're making an investment, and then you walk away from it. There's another old proverb, as true wisdom starts when you plant the seeds under a tree of whose shade you never expect to sit under. And it's like, yeah, there's going to be some of that when you teach, and when you work in education. You plant seeds, and then you're like, well, it's time to move on. I hope you grow. But to actually, and social media has helped, and to actually see some of the seeds that are, germinating and growing to fruition that you got to help plant, that's pretty cool.
So we're nearing the end of our 30-minute time interval. So I wanted to ask a concluding question about, I wanted to see if you wanted to provide any more insight about current learning opportunities in space education.
Yeah, absolutely. I I know that organizations are starting to recognize the need for things like internships and fellowships. So, high school and college students, if you're really interested in a career in space, there are more and more opportunities for you. So, seek some of those out, like the ZED Fellowship, the Brooke Owens. At the National Lab, we have the James A. Abramson Space Leader Fellowship. Um, any kind of opportunities that you can have. I know that La Space is a great program, and the SEAS program, SEAS internships. There are so many space-based and NASA sponsored as well as organization sponsored fellowships and internships that you can take advantage of. And if to my any younger listeners that are space enthusiasts, you can take control of your education. You don't have to wait on someone to tell you you're able to learn or that you can participate in something that you're really interested in. Approach your teacher, say, hey, Mrs. Black, I would love to do Tomatosphere, which is another free program where we'll send you seeds that flew on the International Space Station for 6 weeks, and along with a set of seeds that never left Earth. And it's a blind test, and you record the germination rate. And what a cool thing. Every elementary student learns parts of a plant and life cycle of a seed. So what a cool way to tie space into that. So you can take control of your own learning. You can participate in things online. You can go seek out your own stars and your own constellation, and you can really own your education, especially if with the constraints educators have, sometimes they can't always provide these extra enrichment activities, but encourage them to do that and encourage them to find ways to incorporate it into existing lessons and curriculum. And that's something that I would love to offer to educators. If you struggle like to keep kids engaged and how do I incorporate space into your, please reach out to me, because that's my wheelhouse and that is my passion. I work in person with schools here in Brevard County, and I work with educators online too. So if there's ever anything that I can do to serve you, I'm happy to do so.
I'm so glad you mentioned this plethora of opportunities in space education because it is deemed as an exclusive field. So I'm glad that there's increasing opportunities as time passes. I'm also glad that you mentioned Cs because I was a Cs intern in,
Oh,
yeah,
that's so cool.
yeah, in the summer of 2022. And I always categorize that as my starting point because I had no research experience. I had no like pretty rigorous STEM involvement until that. And then it was kind of like my booster. I gained so much confidence and knowledge from that, and I went on to do even bigger things. So
That's fantastic. I was a judge for the SEAS internship application, and that is another thing that I have a real love-hate relationship with because I love seeing the potential in all these students, and I hate that I can't select every one of them, but there's a place for everyone. We're trying to be so much better about having more opportunities. But the fact that you were a SEAS intern, that's really, really cool. I'm a big fan of that program, and I just encourage everyone to get as involved as they can and pursue their passion.